Welcome to NTI Day 3. So, this one's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be putting some videos on my YouTube channel, and then I'm going to have them in a form, obviously, for you to react to. So, I'm going to talk about 3 major talking points with the story, and I'm going to limit myself to 5 minutes per talking point, so I don't talk for too long about stuff, and because I'm already doing it, I'm droning on. So okay, without any further ado, let's get into our first talking point. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about is her diagnosis. So, the first thing to say is maybe she's just crazy. She's just a crazy lady. And something that kind of points to this or supports this is we have this trope in literature and just kind of in the world in general between the moon and lunacy, because if you think lunacy, moon, and then for one, and there's a big connection between women and the moon, and then you can make the connection to lunacy too. For one thing, there's the Roman goddess Luna, but as it pertains to the story, the main thing is that where she talks about creeping, that most women do not creep by daylight. This is on page 13, so this is later on in the story, after she's pretty well lost her marbles for the most part. Oh yeah, her marbles are long gone at this point. Where she talks about most women don't creep by daylight, because she's thinking that she sees the woman in the wallpaper out, and so she's making an observation about the woman who's gotten out of the wallpaper. She says, "I don't blame her a bit. It must be very humiliating to be caught creeping by daylight. I always lock the door when I creep by daylight." And so the implication is that most women don't creep by daylight, is that means most women must creep by moonlight. And during the moonlight is whenever she does, or she has insomnia, and she kind of that's whenever a lot of her lunacy starts. That's whenever she's like really studying the wallpaper. So there is a connection there between just the nighttime and being crazy, but then she's crazy in the daytime too. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about with her just being plain old good old fashioned nuts is this is a more psychological reading of the story, and this is not my own personal idea, and I don't think that Charlotte Perkins Gilman would support this idea, but this is just another popular interpretation of the story that smart people, scholars have, is that the woman, the narrator, she's not even married to John. So imagine she's not even married to John, and this whole time, this house, everything is a mental hospital. The house is actually a mental hospital. John is a doctor. He is her doctor, and that's the way it sounds like throughout the whole thing, is that it sounds like he's her doctor. And like they have a more doctor-patient relationship than husband-wife relationship. So John's one of the doctors at this hospital. Her brother is one of the doctors at the hospital, and Jenny, the sister, is actually one of the nurses. And so she's in the room. It's described like how a 19th century mental asylum room would look. And so she's totally fabricated this whole thing that she and John are married. So she's invented this idea that she's married to her doctor. and also the fact that she and John, they may even sleep in separate beds, and so he's not even sleeping in the same bed as her, and so that kind of makes it seem like that's what they would do whenever somebody was on the rescuer, is that they would have the patient in one bed, and then the caretaker, typically a nurse, in the other bed. And so that's one of the theories, is that she's just totally out of her mind and thinks John's her husband, but really she is just a patient in a mental hospital. This country estate is not a country estate. There is no baby. And John's her doctor, and she's just imagining that he's her husband. I'm over my 5 minutes, but I'm gonna keep going anyway. Sorry. Ooh, dear. I'll try not to make it much more. So, because the last thing that I wanted to talk about with her diagnosis is what most people kind of agree what her actual diagnosis is. That other stuff is kind of more just for funsies, but this is what people for real actually think, is that she is suffering from postpartum depression. And this is what, because they didn't have this diagnosis in the 19th century, this is what people agree that Charlotte Perkins Gilman herself was suffering with whenever she got put on the rescuer, was postpartum depression. And if you look at the symptoms of postpartum depression, it makes sense. And because hers was left untreated, or well, it was mistreated, and it turned into maybe even postpartum psychosis, which is a whole other thing. It's like postpartum depression, which is bad, but worse. So you can look at the symptoms of postpartum psychosis and you'll see, sounds familiar. And I did want to kind of point out a few lines from why I wrote the Yellow Wallpaper. And because if you remember from that it pointed out that many scholars and doctors now believe that Gilman was suffering from postpartum depression, and it affects a lot of women. It's a very common thing, because we kind of forget that she even had a kid. It's mentioned early on in the story that she has a baby, but she doesn't really have anything to do with the baby. I think the baby's mentioned like maybe 5 times throughout the whole story. So this baby comes up, but she's never around. She's never around the baby, and so you almost kind of forget that she's a new mother. So I will say that one good thing, she wrote this story as a kind of a cautionary tale for other families to be able to look out for things in their own loved ones. And so she talks about how it was being on the rescuer, and then once she was allowed to get off of it, she says, being naturally moved to rejoice by this narrow escape, I wrote the Yellow Wallpaper, with its embellishments and additions to carry out the ideal, to carry out her plot. And she says, I never had hallucinations or objections to my mural decorations. And so she wasn't as bad as this. I mean, she exaggerated. She's saying she exaggerated for the sake of, excitement in her plot. But we can imagine that this could happen to someone. And she says that the best result of her having published this story is that the great specialist, Dr. Weir, admitted to his friends that he had altered his treatment of depression since reading the Yellow Wallpaper. And other people who have read the story and they can kind of see this in their loved ones, they kind of like realize, so that the rescuer's not helping. So she says, it was not my intent to drive people crazy, but to save people from being driven crazy, and it worked. So her story led to some great good. So just goes to show that our words and things that we if we have a message that we want to put out into the world, and we believe in it, and it's a good message, then that it can produce change. So I've gone double the time I meant to. And so that's going to be it for her diagnosis.